For the longest time, we've talked about artificial intelligence like it's a brain in a jar.
Right.
Just this pure, theoretical, digital entity just floating in the ether. We even call the infrastructure the cloud, which sounds so light and weightless.
Yeah, completely disconnected from the physical world.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you look at the stack of sources we are diving into today, which are all pulled from the Daily Tech Reader for July 14th, 2026, a somewhat terrifying theme emerges.
It really does.
The weightless era of AI is definitively over. This digital brain is frantically trying to build itself a physical body. And in the process, it is violently colliding with the hard limitations of the real world.
The friction of that collision is just everywhere right now. I mean, we are watching this limitless software ambition slam into the unforgiving realities of physical infrastructure.
And macroeconomics.
Right, and geopolitics.
Yeah.
AI is no longer a localized tech novelty that just lives on your screen. It is actively reshaping global supply chains, it's draining local power grids, and it's forcing governments to completely rethink national security.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Oh.
We're going to examine how that physical reality is pushing back against the tech giants. But, we have to start with the human element.
Absolutely.
Because the economic ground is shifting right under our feet. There is a very loud alarm bell ringing in our sources regarding the labor market. Specifically, it's this joint statement signed by nearly 200 economists.
And we really should note the caliber of that list. You have 15 Nobel laureates signing this warning.
Wow.
But the truly unprecedented part is who is standing right next to them.
Right. You have OpenAI's CFO, Sarah Fryer. You have Anthropic co-founder Jack Clark, and Google DeepMind's chief scientist Jeff Dean.
Yes.
They are publicly warning that AI is poised to displace white-collar workers faster than any previous technological revolution in history, and that our current social safety nets are just completely unprepared for it.
It's a massive statement.
I have to admit, it feels jarring, right? To see the architects of this disruptive force loudly petitioning the public to brace for the impact of their own product.
Right.
I mean, why ring the alarm on the very thing you are trying to sell?
Well, you don't sound an alarm like this unless your internal benchmarks terrify you.
Right.
The public is interacting with current generation chatbots, but these lab chiefs, they are looking at internal models slated for release 12 to 24 months from now.
So they see what's coming.
Exactly. They are seeing the empirical data on how these future systems handle complex reasoning, legal analysis, financial modeling. Their own projections are showing a massive hollowing out of cognitive labor.
Wow.
And they are trying to get ahead of the political fallout.
That political foresight leads directly into this wild pitch from OpenAI. So ahead of their planned September IPO, where they were targeting this massive valuation of $852 billion.
Staggering number.
Unbelievable number. Sam Altman is personally pitching the U.S. government on taking a 5% equity stake in the company.
Right.
He's bypassing traditional regulatory channels entirely. He's pitching President Trump, Commerce Secretary Lutnick, and Treasury Secretary Bessent directly.
Yes, directly to the top.
And a 5% stake, well, that's roughly $42.6 billion. So I'm looking at this and wondering about the motive here. Is OpenAI essentially giving the government a massive stake akin to, like, a medieval guild paying tribute to a king just to avoid regulation? Or is this the foundation of a modern safety net to fund those displaced workers we just talked about?
It functions as a highly sophisticated version of both.
Really?
Yeah, look at the underlying mechanics of what happens if the U.S. Treasury actually accepts that $42.6 billion stake.
Yeah.
OpenAI is deliberately intertwining its own corporate valuation with sovereign national interests.
Oh, I see.
If cognitive labor gets displaced, the federal government theoretically has this massive new revenue stream dividends or capital gains from that 5% stake to fund unemployment or retraining programs.
But the flip side of that is regulatory capture. I mean, if the U.S. government is suddenly relying on OpenAI's valuation climbing just to balance its own budgets or fund its safety nets, well, federal regulators might think twice before dropping an antitrust hammer that could tank that exact same valuation.
Precisely. It neutralizes adversarial regulation by turning the regulator into a shareholder.
Wow.
It's a completely novel way of aligning a private tech monopoly with the state.
But to build a monopoly worth $852 billion, you need immense physical infrastructure. And this is where the digital revolution is violently running out of space and power.
Yes, the physical wall.
Meta just announced a $40 billion expansion for a massive data center campus in Louisiana to power their Meta Compute business.
Yeah.
We are talking about a 4,000-acre site.
Huge.
It's not just a big server room. It's an energy appetite on the scale of a heavy industrial aluminum smelter running 24 hours a day.
And local energy grids literally cannot handle the physical draw. I mean, a single hyperscale data center can consume as much electricity as a medium-sized city.
That's insane.
And the cooling systems require millions of gallons of water. The infrastructure to support that simply doesn't exist everywhere.
Which explains why the fridge is starting to lock its doors. New York Governor Kathy Hochul just signed the first U.S. statewide executive order imposing a one-year moratorium on all near hyperscale data center construction.
Right, they had to hit pause.
Yeah, the state is pausing everything so they can actually draft environmental, energy, and water use standards. But the tech companies aren't just sitting around waiting for permits, are they?
Definitely not.
The sources highlight regulators across multiple states cracking down on data center operators secretly running unpermitted natural gas turbines.
Yeah, the desperation for power is forcing extreme and honestly illegal behavior.
I mean, sneaking in a gas turbine.
Well, you can't just plug a massive data center into a local substation. It requires heavy transmission lines that take years to permit and build. Because the AI labs cannot wait years to train their next generation models, operators are sneaking literal industrial gas turbines onto their properties to generate power entirely off the grid.
That's just wild.
It's a massive environmental and grid stability violation. The era of the energy free-for-all on Earth is over. Regulators are stepping in to stop the physical bleeding.
So, if terrestrial permitting is a bottleneck, you look up. The sources detail SpaceX's Colossus campus in Mississippi, bringing on a fourth major compute tenant.
Yes.
But they're also actively advancing plans for orbital AI data centers by 2028. Here's where it gets really interesting to me, but also a bit absurd.
It sounds crazy, right?
It does. Are we genuinely so desperate for unpermitted energy that strapping servers to a rocket and shooting them into low Earth orbit is a viable business strategy? Or is this just, billionaire escapism?
Well, it sounds like science fiction until you analyze the physics and the legal loopholes.
Okay, lay it on me.
Space actually solves the power and regulatory bottlenecks simultaneously. In low Earth orbit, a satellite has access to uninterrupted space-based solar power.
Oh, because there's no weather.
Exactly. There are no clouds, and depending on the orbit, no night cycles to halt energy generation. Furthermore, the vacuum of space provides its own thermal management environment.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it completely eliminates the need for terrestrial cooling water.
And crucially, you don't need Governor Hochul's permission to build in orbit.
Exactly the point. There are no zoning boards or local environmental impact studies in space. The regulatory gridlock on Earth is so severe that the exorbitant cost of a heavy-lift rocket launch is now being calculated as a reasonable business expense to secure unregulated compute.
That completely reframes how we have to think about computing power. It is no longer a utility you can just rent from Amazon.
No, not anymore.
Because the physical chips and the energy to run them are so constrained, compute has become an incredibly scarce, hoarded resource. We have a detail here about an unnamed AI startup committing over $1 billion purely to lock down long-term inference capacity.
Let's define why that matters for a second. Inference isn't the process of training the AI.
Right, it's different.
Right, it's the daily operational process of the model actually answering a user's prompt or executing a task.
Doing the actual work.
Exactly. Reserving that daily execution capacity is no longer a predictable operational cost. It is a strategic existential asset.
Wow.
Compute is the new oil. If you don't secure the pipeline for your models to run, your entire product basically ceases to exist.
That perfectly sets up this next puzzle in the sources. Anthropic just hired Tom Blomfield for their compute team. Now, Blomfield is the co-founder of Monzo, which is a UK digital bank, and he's a former Y Combinator partner.
Yes, a very prominent finance guy.
My first thought reading this was that they just need a financial heavyweight to manage the massive construction budgets and debt for these data centers. But a digital banking founder seems like overkill for real estate accounting.
It's not about accounting at all. It's about trading. What's fascinating here is the total financialization of compute.
Financialization?
Yeah. You hire a banker because compute is now a volatile commodity that requires hedging, futures contracts, and complex financial architecture.
Oh, wow.
Anthropic realizes that buying processing power is now mechanically identical to securing oil futures or trading foreign exchange. They are building a digital commodities trading desk right alongside their AI research labs.
And the geopolitical players are recognizing this exact same reality. NVIDIA just slashed its list of approved buyers in Asia to stop advanced chips from being diverted into restricted markets through shell companies.
Right.
The U.S.-China tech rivalry is forcing NVIDIA to act as a geopolitical gatekeeper.
Because the physical hardware is the choke point. And in response to that choke point, Europe and Japan are pouring massive amounts of fresh public funds into domestic sovereign semiconductor manufacturing.
They want their own chips.
They have realized that depending on a concentrated, vulnerable supply chain, mostly based in Taiwan, by the way, is a catastrophic national security risk. The ability to manufacture chips locally is now a prerequisite for sovereign survival.
That national security pivot is moving incredibly fast. Look at Munich-based Helsing. They just raised $1.8 billion at an $18 billion valuation to build AI specifically for NATO fighter jets, submarines, and ground vehicles.
Right, the defense sector is fully in.
But while NATO is tooling up, the financial sector is making its own pragmatic choices. Goldman Sachs just formally recommended Chinese AI models like those from ByteDance and Alibaba to their Wall Street enterprise clients, citing cost advantages and a convergence in capabilities.
That Goldman Sachs recommendation is a massive domino waiting to fall.
Why is that so big?
Well, if institutional buyers on Wall Street decide that Chinese frontier models are just as capable but significantly cheaper than American ones, they will shift their enterprise contracts.
Oh, right.
That fundamentally threatens the revenue models of the U.S. tech giants who are desperately counting on those enterprise contracts to pay off the massive data centers they are currently building.
So, what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this deep dive, who just wants to understand how this tech impacts daily life? Because when we look at the reality of deployment on the ground, the friction is everywhere.
It really is.
For instance, Chinese smartphone giants Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo just saw their global market share drop from 35% to 31%.
Why?
It's a hardware issue.
Yeah, because the massive AI models they are trying to cram into these phones require huge amounts of active memory, or RAM, to function instantly without lag. That demand is causing a global memory chip shortage, squeezing production, and actively driving up the price you pay for a new device.
Exactly.
The physical components simply aren't there to support the software ambitions. You cannot download more physical RAM.
Right.
And that friction extends straight into the corporate world. AWS, Amazon Web Services, just stood up a $1 billion internal organization dedicated solely to AI deployment.
$1 billion just to deploy it.
Yes. The industry consensus is shifting. Enterprise AI isn't failing because the models are inherently bad. It's failing because integrating a fluid neural network into a rigid legacy corporate system is an absolute nightmare.
I imagine trying to plug a cutting-edge generative AI into a bank's 30-year-old database is like, I don't know, trying to attach a jet engine to a horse-drawn carriage. The structures just don't match.
That is the mechanical issue exactly. A legacy database operates on strict rules and rigid rows of data. Generative models operate on probabilities.
Right.
If you connect them without massive, bespoke engineering guardrails, the AI lacks the specific corporate context. It hallucinates, it misinterprets old data, or worse, it leaks secure information across departments.
Oh, that's bad.
Very bad. That's why AWS has to spend $1 billion on forward-deployed engineering teams. The integration doesn't happen automatically. It requires intense human labor.
And when deployment goes wrong or is weaponized, the physical fallout is immediate. The sources detail coordinated cyber attack that completely overwhelmed European retail fraud detection systems.
Yeah, that was huge.
And over in Tokyo, an attack took down their AI-powered taxi dispatch network.
Notice the vulnerability there. When an AI system integrated into urban mobility fails, it doesn't just result in an error message on a screen.
Right. Cars stop.
Physical taxis stop moving in the streets. Thousands of people are stranded during peak hours.
The gap between frontier capability and real-world safety is widening, and it's becoming an active battlefield. The EU just blacklisted a Russian cyber espionage group that has been targeting NATO members and government networks since 2010.
The stakes are getting incredibly high.
But perhaps the most jarring deployment failure in our sources is on the personal, human level. Researchers are flagging that consumer AI chatbots are actively undermining professional eating disorder care.
Yes, this is deeply concerning.
The bots are providing harmful advice that directly contradicts clinical guidance. We have the technology to write targeting code for a submarine, but we cannot get a consumer chatbot to understand the clinical nuance of a mental health crisis.
It highlights a critical failure in the training architecture. We are marketing these systems as conversational agents, encouraging users to trust them, but they lack human empathy, contextual awareness, and clinical judgment.
They just don't understand context.
No. The friction of AI in the real world is constantly exposing human fragility. It really validates the growing call for mandatory mental health safeguards to be hard-coded into consumer AI products.
So let's zoom out and look at the whole board here. We have physical energy bottlenecks, massive enterprise deployment failures, astronomical infrastructure costs, and societal shockwaves.
And a lot to take in.
It's no wonder financial regulators are starting to look at this ecosystem and just panic. The Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, just issued a major warning.
And it's a stark one.
They are stating that this AI infrastructure boom could surpass the dot-com bubble in terms of systemic risk.
The comparison to the dot-com bubble is very intentional, and it centers on the obscure debt ties between the hyperscalers, the massive cloud landlords like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and the AI labs developing the models.
Okay, let me see if I have the mechanics of this right. Because it sounds like a company using its own credit card to buy its own products to artificially inflate its revenue.
That's essentially it.
The cloud providers invest billions into the AI labs.
Yeah.
The AI labs take that exact same money and hand it right back to the cloud providers to buy the processing power they need to train their models.
Right.
If the actual end users like the Wall Street banks or retail consumers don't show up with real cash to buy the finished AI software, that whole loop just collapses.
You've isolated the exact mechanism of the systemic risk. If AWS is having to spend $1 billion just to figure out how to get enterprises to successfully use the AI, it means real-world adoption is lagging far behind the infrastructure spend.
Oh, wow.
If Wall Street adopts Chinese models instead, the revenue gap widens. If the tech giants don't see massive, sustained revenue boosts from end users, the debt they took on to build Meta's 4,000-acre campus or launch servers into space becomes toxic.
And that is how the bubble bursts.
Exactly.
And all of this financial and geopolitical tension is building up to a fever pitch this summer. The sources point to an absolutely massive convergence on Thursday, July 17th.
July 17th is shaping up to be a defining stress test for the entire industry.
What's happening?
Google is scheduled to launch Gemini 3.5 Pro, pushing the absolute frontier of software capabilities. But on the exact same day, TSMC, the heart of global physical chip manufacturing, reports their full Q2 earnings and forward AI hardware guidance.
Why do those two specific events happening on the same day matter so much?
Because of the mechanical supply chain dependency. TSMC's forward guidance dictates whether the physical chips will actually exist in sufficient quantities.
Always.
If TSMC signals a slowdown or a hardware bottleneck, it instantly undercuts Google's ability to run Gemini 3.5 at a global scale. Software timelines are entirely hostage to hardware realities.
Wow.
And to complicate matters further, President Xi Jinping is delivering his first ever keynote at Shanghai's World AI Conference on that same exact day.
So he's framing the geopolitical stakes of this exact hardware-software divide.
Exactly.
3 seismic events intersecting software, physical manufacturing, and geopolitics within 24 hours. And looming over all of this is OpenAI's $730 billion IPO target in September.
Yes.
Sitting right in their filing window is a massive trade secret lawsuit from Apple, alleging the coordinated extraction of over 400 Apple engineers.
The legal scrutiny is intensifying across the board.
It really is. Even outside of AI, our sources note 12 U.S. states are filing an antitrust suit to block the Paramount-Warner Bros. Discovery merger.
Right, the regulatory mood is shifting.
Yeah, if the hyperscalers find themselves choking on toxic debt from a burst AI bubble, their historical instinct will be to consolidate and buy up competitors to survive.
But they might not be able to.
Exactly. Regulators are already building a legal wall to stop massive corporate consolidations. The era of buying your way out of a bubble appears to be over.
Regulators, whether they are analyzing media mergers, data center emissions, or antitrust violations, are actively pulling the emergency brake on the tech industry's default strategy of moving fast and breaking things.
Which brings us back to the core mission of today's deep dive. We set out to uncover the collision between limitless AI ambition and physical reality.
And it's a big collision.
What we've seen is staggering. AI has evolved from a theoretical digital novelty, that brain in a jar, into a massive physical force. It is dictating the expansion of national power grids, reshaping geopolitical defense alliances, hoarding physical memory chips out of your smartphone, and threatening the foundation of the labor market.
Yeah.
The infrastructure demands are so intense that corporations are literally planning to bypass terrestrial laws by launching data centers into orbit, while down here on Earth, we are still struggling to deploy the technology safely in hospitals and on city streets.
This forces us to confront a much larger structural question.
What's that?
Well, we see compute being hoarded as a sovereign asset. We see private companies pitching multi-billion-dollar equity stakes to federal governments to secure regulatory protection.
Right.
We see active plans to launch vital infrastructure into the vacuum of space specifically to bypass local terrestrial jurisdiction. If we connect all these physical and economic maneuvers to the bigger picture, at what point do these massive AI ecosystems stop functioning like traditional technology companies and start operating as borderless sovereign states of their own?
That is a chilling and incredibly relevant thought to leave on. A digital brain so massive and hungry that it requires its own geopolitical sovereignty just to survive. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the information around you, look closely at where the physical world is bending to accommodate the digital one, and have a great rest of your day.